you geeks! Everything's coming up roses for fans of the world this weekend. For Gavilar, not so much. We got the Olympics, Dragon Prince, House of the Dragon still going strong, and of course the crown jewel, the long-awaited Prologue to Wind and Truth by Brandon Sanderson. I will not play the clip from High School Musical 3, but that was totally in my mind this whole time. Although Gavilar notably doesn't spend any of his perspective time at the feast. Instead, he's off lurking in the shadows, plotting his master plan for world domination.
Fluffy's master plan for world domination.
So, here are my insights into his oversights, as well as my own from earlier versions of this chapter released online. Spoiler warning for the entire Cosmere released up to this point, and mild spoilers for Just Stab Me Now by Jill Barrop. To live. Sanderson is just relishing in the sweet, sweet irony of this final prologue.
A little too ironic.
The trope of the king who dies in pursuit of his own immortality is as old as history itself. But Sanderson brings us this ancient trope in a new way through a series of changing perspectives of this pivotal night. Starting with Zeph's perspective of Gavilar as the noble king he must bring low due to unspeakable treachery, to finally Gavilar himself revealing that he has overreached in his extent to become he who would swallow God by his own hubris and ostracized everyone around him who could care about him. Intentionally! Dalinar still thought no one knew he'd killed Evie. Gavilar had found out the truth, which let him use these subtle manipulations. It is so beautifully ironic that Gavilar is so obsessed with forging his own immortal legacy that he doesn't even notice when he drops what are to be his immortal words, reminding Dalinar to keep to the codes.
Keep to the code. Aye, the code.
The next sweet layer of irony comes from the series of discussions that Gavilar completely misjudges what is at stake. Not only those with the heralds themselves, but with Eshonai and the role her people would play. He thinks went swimmingly. The conversation with the Parsh woman went smoothly, with him manipulating her and therefore her people to prepare them for the role they would play. Then there's that moment of possible brilliance when Taravangian pricks Gavilar's long dormant, beaten to a pulp conscience still alive in there somewhere. But the moment is quickly gone as Gavilar goes back to underestimating Taravangian like everyone else does at this time, so who can blame him? Fear. Well, it's easy and fun to sit back and laugh at Gavilar's foolishness on the night of his demise.
So I just thought I'd have to thinking you wouldn't have thought that.
This final version of the prologue really highlights for me Gavilar's fear. A fear that he's not even willing to admit to himself, yet is present and driving all of his soon-to-be fatal decisions, starting with driving Dalinar away. Gavilar remembered seeing his brother approach across a battlefield, soaked in blood, eyes appearing to glow red within his helm, hungry for the life Gavilar lived. That ghost haunted him. Fortunately, both Dalinar's pain and his addiction made him easy to control. It was out of fear of losing the power offered by the Stormfather that Gavilar ostracized Navani, Iale, and Toril Sadeas. Though, with hindsight, it was probably a good idea to leave out Sadeas for this one. But ultimately, Gavilar died as he lived, alone and afraid. Insane timeline. In the 2 years since Sanderson read his 3.0 draft online, I've had plenty of time to calculate, well, the timeline. So some of what I had breezed over in my first reading now strikes me as significant. Notably that the Stormfather gives an estimation for how long it takes a herald to go insane. The heralds are insane, afflicted with unnatural ailments unique to their ancient natures. How long does it take, Gavilar asked, for the symptoms to appear? Difficult to say. 1,000 years, perhaps 2. 1,000 years, you say, perhaps 2. Well, according to my calculations, Aharietiam happened approximately 4,500 years before Gavilar's death, and the Recreants happened 2,000 years after Aharietiam. So, if the Stormfather can be trusted on this, heraldry insanity was coinciding at the time of the Recreants, and Restaris' own words seem to support this. I wanted us to explore what made those Radiants so grand before things went wrong. He ran his hand through his thinning hair. Before I made them go wrong. And of course we know that the Recreants aligned with the capture of Ba Edo Mishram herself, which Restaris now seems to claim having taken a part in. I know where she is hidden, Restaris whispered. Where her soul is. Ba Edo Mishram, granter of forms. The one who could rival him. The one we betrayed. Curse you, unclear modifiers! Is Restaris talking about betraying Ba Edo Mishram or someone else? I guess that's a raffo, and I hope we find out in Stormlight 5 and we don't have to wait another 10 years. Not a herald. The biggest change I noticed in this final draft from the 3.0 version I reviewed years ago is that the Stormfather makes it very clear he is not offering Gavilar a place as a herald. Then I will have that long to find a solution, Gavilar said. A much more reasonable timeline than the mere century with luck afforded to a mortal, wouldn't you say? I have not promised you this boon. You guess it is what I offer, but I seek only a champion. Still, tell me, would you accept the cost of becoming a herald? Everyone you know would be dust by the time you returned. This distinction is not at all clear in the 3.0 version, which read at this point, Then I will have that long to find a solution, Gavilar said. A much more reasonable timeline than the century, with luck, afforded to a mortal, wouldn't you say? Are you willing to accept the cost? Everyone you know will be dust by the time you return. I think Sanderson changed this passage, which occurs rather early in the prologue, because he wants the reader to focus on Gavilar's hubris and pride and the irony of him swinging around Yezrian's blade. As I think even the most superficial reader would have caught, there's something off about the Stormfather offering a bond of heraldry.
Warning.
I think Sanderson wants us to go into Stormlight 5 mistrusting the Stormfather. After all, we've seen Pattern lie, and the Honor-Spren delude themselves in their treatment of Adolin. However, I still think that this is a Shar in a wig. After all, it is the premise of the Stormlight Archive that heralds can, do, and did lie. And they can sense when another of them dies, as happens during the prologue. On a more prose-oriented note, I love Sanderson's turn of phrase, they will be dust by the time you return, since Gavilar is about to get a very personal reminder that he is dust, and to dust he will very soon return.
Dust you are, to dust you will return.
Kelsier. We now have visual confirmation that Thydakar is none other than Scadrial's undead phantom menace, Kelsier. And I've got to hand it to Sanderson for flipping the script on these kinds of tropes. For it struck me while reading Just Stab Me Now by Jill Barrett that I find men involved in secret societies based on flora to be objectively hotter.
The mention of that scoundrel makes us swoon.
Then I realized that the Ghost Bloods are a secret society formed around a flower-based insignia. So I had to come to grasp with, does this make Kelsier objectively hot? I landed on that floral-based insignia only make men 10% more hot.
10% of nothing is, let me do the math here, nothing and then nothing.
It's ironic that this trope originally applied to an Englishman who was trying to save the aristos from Madame Guillotine, and no, it applies to a Frenchman who wants to kill the aristos. Except, does Kelsier do that? No, he's allied himself with a brutal king and possibly allowed, if not encouraged, the passing of the Everstorm from the cognitive realm into the physical. It's almost like Kelsier has abandoned everything he once stood for.
It was said that you would destroy the Sith, not join them!
Secret Scholar! The last new detail dropped in this version of the prologue is that Gavilar may have known something original all along, and that he was working with a secret world-hopping scholar. Gavilar smiled. None of them knew of the secret scholar he kept in reserve. A master of all things scientific, a man who is neither ghost blood nor a son of honor, a man from another world. The name of this scholar, for fans, shouldn't be that big of a secret, really. Navani spotted the Artifabrian holding the box in question in Rhythm of War. That was Rushur Chris, the artist and master Artifabrian. When had he arrived? Who had invited him? He was holding a small box with a flower painted on it. Could that be one of his new Fabrials? Now the question is, if Rushur Chris has been confirmed to be a world hopper, then do we, the fandom, know their true identity? My first guess, based on the name, was Chris, the scholar who writes the Ars Arcanum in World at the end of each Cosmere book. However, few flaws in this. She would be considered to be Makabaki by Rosharan, and Navani describes the two Ardents as just two elderly Ardents. Also, Chris has presented herself in every book as a her. She does have a male assistant, Naz, who has dressed up as an Ardent on World before. Kaladin did catch Rock shooing away a lanky man in an Ardent's robe. But up to this point off Taldane, these two have been largely neutral observers, more or less, of the Cosmere's goings-on. So, turning our attention to the other known scholarly world-hopping Ardent on Roshar, we have Zael, aka Vasher from Warbreaker. Now, as a returned, he is known for not looking like the other Ardents, but he is also one of the few known to be able to change his appearance without light weaving. Unlike Naz and Chris, he has a personal, dire need to be able to transport investiture from one world to another, and to transpose it from one tone to another, lest he die. However, after his misadventures with Nightblood, I would have hoped that he would have stopped messing with large, powerful sources of investiture. To quote beta reader Paige Vest, my final suspect is the unnamed, unidentified Khandra who is lurking still somewhere on Roshar. My primary guess for this person has always been Rushu, as she has expressed very Chandra-like opinions on the nature of hair.
It's a wig, right?
I think it looks really sweet, Mia. Looks like she got a head transplant.
Not to mention the similarity between Rushur and Rushu has confused me for quite a long time. But if I were a Khandra, upon first arriving in Roshar and seeing the Vorin liking for palindromes, why not call myself Rushur, only to learn later that that is culturally incompetent. So, if also upon learning that my work had played a role in getting the former king of Alethkar assassinated, that seems like an excellent time for an identity, sex, and name change, all to be able to better serve his wife, as she is the one who actually understood those things. It's notable that Navani never on page told Rushu about the strange anti-void light sphere until after the thing had exploded, and even then vaguely. I hope it's Rushu, because she is famous for being oblivious, and I wouldn't be as mad at her as I would be for Vasher for working with Gavilar to mess everything up. Where is Yasna? The last detail to strike me about the prologue is what wasn't mentioned. That is the name of Yasna, Gavilar's daughter, who we know from Words of Radiance was off bonding a spren by battle to the death during this time when her father is trying to do the same of sorts. He barely even considers Yasna, besides in passing, as the person who is a suitable match for Amaram, though she is ultimately going to take up his quest to find Urithiru. Gavilar continued, I will be mounting an expedition back to the Shattered Plains. Soon, we can leverage my new treaty to obtain guides, have them lead us inward toward the center, toward Urithiru. And he totally doesn't even consider her ongoing schemes with assassins to be worth noting. Yasna's fears in Words of Radiance seem to be utterly unfounded. When had he become so discerning? Storms. She felt as if she hardly knew this man any longer. From the way he inspected her, it almost seemed that he didn't trust her. Did he know about her meeting with Liss? No, Yasna, he had no clue about your plans with Liss. He was living in his own little sphere, surrounded by lies and truths cloaked in fear, leaving us to only marvel at the cruel irony of Gavilar's death and to hunger for more Stormlight, as these answers only lead us to more questions, which we will discuss in future videos. So, like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. Leave a comment. Who do you think the Secret Scholar is? And thanks for watching. Bye!